everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am your host, Taylor Rockwell. Daryl Grove is not with me. Instead, I'm going to be having a long conversation with Mr. Joe Lowery of The Athletic, as well as many other publications and sites. I talked about this a little bit earlier in the week. We've had Paul Tenorio on. We had Felipe Cardenas on to help me kind of make sense of the U.S. from a more general perspective and the results against Uruguay and Mexico. With Joe, we talk a little bit about that up front, about like kind of the state of the team, the styles we've seen, the patterns we've seen so far. But then we get pretty in-depth on some of the players that we've enjoyed, some of the players we didn't enjoy, what we saw, what these players need to work on. That was a thing I enjoyed immensely, was kind of trying to find things that we want to be able to track and see how players improve in terms of like individual abilities. Could be passing, could be on-the-ball decision-making, could be defensive positioning, lots of different stuff in there. We get to sort of what our ideal U.S. squad looks like right now, combining what Berhalter does with what we want to see done. And we close it out with some long-awaited, if you are in the kind of American Southwest, discussion of Phoenix Rising, the USL Championship side, who are far and away the best team in USL Championship, an 18-point lead at the top of the Western Conference. They have broken the record for, I think, longest winning streak in any U.S. soccer system that at least has been tracked. I'm sure somebody will email in to say that this team in 1904 did it better, but I'm sticking with Phoenix Rising for now. So we talk about that. We talk about individual players. We talk about the national team as a whole. We talk about Berhalter's style and tactics. Lots of great USMNT chat in there. So I will stop talking and instead say, Joe, thank you very much for taking the time to come back on the show for the second time in fewer than 2 weeks. Not bad.
Of course. Thanks for having me back on, Taylor. I like coming on, and doing it a couple times in a couple weeks is great with me.
Yeah, it's a new one. So we did a sort of preview of the Mexico game and a sort of a general look at the camp. Now that camp is done, the international break is over, we can sort of look back on it. And I think a good way to start would be with the tweet that you sent me, I think halfway through the Mexico game, which was, we were way too chipper, weren't we? And I think that's probably true. So I wanted to start off with a bit of a cliche and essentially just ask you, if you're assigning the USMNT a letter grade for this camp or for these friendlies, what would you go for overall? You can split it into the friendlies, individual results if you want, but I want your overall grade if possible.
Yes, the overall grade has got to be a D, right?
Okay.
I don't know that I'd say an F, because that would probably mean that, Berhalter gets fired and all this stuff that the team really did fail, and you're starting over again, you're retaking the class. But it seems to me that they're not too far above that. But at the same time, I'm caught of two minds here, because I really do think that it is worth building on what Berhalter has sort of set out to do. It's worth not throwing that all away. So unfortunately, that means, at least the way Berhalter has taken it and interpreted his own ideas, that means that we have to watch the team consistently, turn the ball over and build up against Mexico. And that's not something that anyone wants to watch as fans. It's not something that, individuals want to see. They don't want to see their team get pummeled repeatedly and do the same things over and over again with little adjustments, or at least little visible adjustments. So it's frustrating in that respect. The Uruguay game, I do think, was a little bit better, but it's hard to compare. They're not identical. Like, the two friendlies weren't identical because the Uruguay and Mexico played vastly different defensive styles. So it's, you don't necessarily want to compare them, again, because the U.S.'s lineup was different as well. But I think there were some things that I would say we learned and that brought value. But on the whole, it was not a great window, Taylor.
I would agree with that. I think I agree with your grade. We'll see how that, if that changes for me over the course of this conversation. I tend to be more positive the longer we talk, so we'll see if we end up.
No, yes, me too. So we could be at a solid B- by the time we finish here. I don't know.
All right. Well, then let me ask you this: if not an elevator pitch, say you're explaining the current U.S. team to a casual soccer fan, how do you do it? What are you telling that person about? Here's their current status, here's their style of play, here's the state of the team, here's what they're trying to do. How do you give a succinct explanation of the U.S. national team as it currently exists?
I think a good place to start is with the players. So there's just, the talent deficit between Mexico and the U.S. was pretty clear to see. So if I'm explaining the current state of the national team to someone who is not particularly informed about it, I'd start there. So a limited player pool right now, it's pretty shallow. But the goals that Berhalter and the coaching staff are setting for the team he has lofty expectations. So the coaching staff wants to see the team, take risks in possession, move the ball quickly, and play into space. They have the ideal picture of what they want in their heads. They have the ideas behind kind of what they're trying to do. Just I think the gap is between the communication of those ideas from coaches to players and the execution as well. So struggling talent pool with a very idealized idea of what they want to do, but maybe not quite there yet. Well, clearly not quite there yet in execution, or maybe in communication as well.
I thought Will Parchman had a great tweet. I think I saw this from you retweeting it, but it was essentially the idea being, the gist of it was like Greg Berhalter is William Faulkner trying to write like ad copy for Popeyes, that it can be all verbose and beautiful, but this is Popeyes. Like, you know what you're doing here. Come on. And I guess I feel like there must have been that temptation for Berhalter. I think a lot of other coaches would have just gone, okay, we're going to sit in, we're going to be direct, we're going to kind of abandon this approach. He seems very proud of his players and himself to some extent. Not saying he's arrogant, but I think he was happy that they stuck with this style. Like, but is that in your mind a good thing that they kind of stuck with it? Like, maybe it lays the foundational building blocks for what they're going to do down the road. But to me, it also speaks to a lack of improvisation, a lack of adaptability when what you're doing clearly isn't working.
I agree, and that's why I'm sort of stuck in two places mentally about how I think about this, because I do think there is real value in kind of using these friendlies as a training session. Like, I mean, from a fan's perspective, you don't want to see that, but there is value in going out there and getting reps against a high press that you can't really replicate in any other situation. So I see value in building for the future that way, but from a tactical perspective, I also see the limitations that just kind of going out there and trying to bang your head through the wall over and over again. It's maybe not how I would think to approach if I were in Berhalter's situation, how I would think to draw up a game plan. You want to see your players adopt the style and the principles that you're teaching them and that you're teaching and training and running through. But at a certain point, you also have to play to win as well. And I don't know that we're seeing that from the U.S., but then again, I'm not really sure that matters right now. I think, it's what Berhalter said, and Paul Tenorio talked about this on your show earlier this week, after that Jamaica friendly before the Gold Cup, it doesn't matter. The result doesn't matter, and no one's going to remember the result. So we're probably going to remember this Mexico game, but if I'm in Berhalter's shoes, I can't understand where he's coming from. I absolutely do get the idea that he wants to see his team adopt these principles, and maybe in a meaningful competition, he would adjust a little bit. Even if it's a World Cup final, the U.S. isn't going to just play into Mexico's press over and over again. They're going to go long. That's just the nuts and bolts of it. So I see both sides of it, and it is slightly frustrating as an observer to see the team kind of go through the motions a little bit, but it might just be necessary for the long term.
But here's where I get confused, though, is like, I know like the results don't matter, it's friendlies, whatever, but like at some point it does have to matter. And I don't mean that in the sense of like we don't want to fail to qualify or we want to do well in an official competition, but like there has to be, like you can't go straight from like, oh yeah, this totally works in practice, and then you try it in a game and it doesn't. Like there has to be that intermediary step where like, oh no, we see them in a friendly, look totally dominant, and they all seem capable of this. And I guess my fear is like, if you're always waiting for it to be like an official competition that matters and you're never sort of looking at friendlies, I'm not saying this is you, Joe. I'm just saying like this is where my mind is like I get confused about like, but at a certain point we have to see it sort of working successfully. Otherwise, why would we have faith that it's then going to work when the time comes that it matters?
Right. No, and I totally agree with that. And I just end up circling all around these arguments over and over in my head because where you're coming from is exactly right. If we're just kind of waiting for the games that matter to run the system and expecting it's going to work just because we've had all these friendlies that we really tried and we really practiced it, even if it didn't work so well, like, oh, it'll work when the time comes and we need it to work. That's not logical. That doesn't make sense. So just expecting that it's going to just all come together when it has to isn't fair. So we do need to start to see the pieces come together. And I think, in the Uruguay game, things were better, different. Uruguay tested a different part of the United States offensive game plan than Mexico did. But, there was some positives to take away from that game. But as we come into CONCACAF Nations League, we have to see these ideas start being adopted better by the players. And we have to see Berhalter's vision sort of come into focus. Otherwise, the team's going to be in trouble when the games come that matter, like you're saying.
So Sam Stejskal was on the show this week. He was arguing that we don't need to look for silver linings against Mexico. So I won't ask you to necessarily look for a silver lining, but I did, like stalking your timeline on Twitter, I did note that you went back and watched those first 20 minutes against Mexico. You seemed slightly more okay with it than I think Daryl or I were. So I wanted to ask about that, early on here. Like, did you see things against Mexico that you felt like could be foundational building blocks? Were there patterns of play or approaches to the game that you thought were sort of interesting adjustments or sort of things we haven't seen before that are maybe signs that we're moving in the right direction? If not the right direction, then at least like you did see sort of evolution in the tactics is probably the succinct way to put it.
I did. I only tweeted about the first 20 minutes because I didn't want to stir the pot any more than I had to. But I went back and watched the whole game this week for a piece that'll hopefully be coming out on The Athletic at some point over the next couple of days. I don't know exactly when. But I went back and watched the whole thing. And my takeaway sort of was exactly what Henry Bushnell wrote his article for Yahoo Sports about. He was talking about how the U.S. struggled to manipulate, no, not to manipulate space, but to recognize and take advantage of that space. I think in build-up, the U.S. did a good job of creating opportunities to break through Mexico's press. They just didn't do a good job of taking advantage. So there were a couple of clips that stand out in my mind where Alfredo Morales had a chance to just slide a few yards over, 5 yards over maybe, to be an option to really completely break the press and get the ball in the middle of the field and just be able to run in transition. And he didn't see it. And he wasn't the only one. I think a lot of the different players in that lineup had maybe a lack of understanding of how to move into those pockets of space. But a genuine positive that I do take away from that game is that the system that Berhalter's implementing is creating those opportunities. So maybe they're not quite ready to take advantage of them. And I don't understand why they're not able to do that at this point, but they're there. So that's maybe the biggest positive. It's also a negative. It's a negative that they didn't take advantage of them from a result standpoint. But the fact that the system is creating those pockets of space to play through pressure is a positive thing in my mind.
All right, that makes sense to me, and I can take that. I think I saw Matt Tomaszewicz. He tweeted out, I think it was him, I could be wrong, something along the lines of like he could tell with a few players that like the idea was there and the sort of understanding of what was being asked of them was there, but it was so deliberate, which I think is the nice way of saying slow, that like maybe what it indicated was that it was still players not being quite familiar with what was being asked of them, and it's still not sort of second nature, and maybe that's the partial explanation for why the U.S. struggled to take advantage of that space or manipulate it, I think is a great word, because maybe those players just are still like, okay, I know I'm supposed to be in this area, but then like they're trying to solve like the rest of the flashcard, they're trying to memorize the rest of the flashcard, and they like remember the gist of it, but not quite enough of the specifics to actually pull it off. So I guess that would be then foundational building blocks if you know the first half of the flashcard, but not the second.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the basics are there. Maybe just the players aren't quite in the system yet. I mean, just using Morales as an example, he hasn't been in with Berhalter yet. And it seems to me that the coaching staff is reaching out to these players and watching film and trying to communicate what they want to see before they actually get the players in camp. But, there's a difference between seeing it and doing it, right? So I think there's reason to be slightly patient in understanding of these players working through the mental process in their head. But, you do want to see the results happen, and I don't think they quite came together in the Mexico game.
What else did you see in your rewatches? Like, can be positive, can be negative, but were there any other things that you kind of consistently spotted? It could be like an individual player doing something or overall trends?
From that Mexico game or from both games?
I mean, either game, whichever one you want to go with. We can open it up here a little bit since Daryl and I have talked a lot about Mexico. You and I have already talked about it a little bit. Could be Mexico, could be Uruguay, whichever you prefer.
Well, one more thing from the Mexico game that stands out in my mind is Zach Steffen's distribution. I mean, he's playing because he's supposed to be the guy who can get the ball to his outfield players the most consistently, and he really struggled in that game to play those outlet passes out wide to the fullbacks or to settle the ball. He had some positive moments, but on the whole, I don't think it was a very good performance from him, and so that's something to keep an eye on for the future. That was my other big takeaway from the Mexico game. In the Uruguay game, I think there were some real positives in how the team moved the ball. It was a little slow on the whole. Just the entire game was slow. The atmosphere was odd. It's been talked about, I think enough already at this point. But there were some nice attacking combinations that led to a couple decent goal scoring chances. And it's a pretty low bar when the word decent is being used in a positive spin. But it's true. I think the U.S. had some good attacking combinations out wide, maybe lacking a little bit centrally in terms of their ability to get the ball and draw out players in the middle of the field. But Berhalter always talks about hitting those balls from his central midfielder. Jackson Yueill played those long diagonals out wide. He talks about that all the time. If you give him a chance to talk, Berhalter's likely going to talk about that. So when you see Jackson Yueill spray the ball wide to Jordan Morris and Sebastian Jet as that central midfielder, making a run to the edge of the box and attacking that area that Manchester City is famous for. I think that's great. That's great to see. And it's not the complete picture yet. And I don't think that Berhalter would be satisfied with the attacking performance in possession in that game. But I think there were some genuine positives to take away. And hopefully when you start to get some of the more first choice players into that lineup, if it's Pulisic receiving the ball out wide instead of Morris, and I don't know, if it's Weston McKennie or charging into the box, things like that. If you start to upgrade the players as well, the ideas and the execution on those ideas is going to improve.
Hey everybody, wanted to take a quick break to let you know that today's show is sponsored in part by Manscaped, who is the #1 in men's below-the-belt grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. If you head over to manscaped.com, you can check out all of the different products they have. They have them in a variety of sets, and then the individual tools, and then the individual products themselves. If you just want one specific thing, it's hot. It's still pretty sweaty. It's 100 degrees outside, so maybe you want a specialized deodorant for downstairs. So you can get that from the Crop Preserver. They also have the Foot Duster, which is a cooling 24-hour foot deodorant. So if you're wearing sandals, or maybe you've worn the shoes without socks a few too many times and now things aren't great down there, you can get the foot deodorant to cover that one right up, and you're good to go. Then obviously they've got the kind of more noteworthy, more known products like the Plow, which is a safety razor, if you want to get that close of a shave, or the Lawnmower 2.0, which is their waterproof electric trimmer that uses proprietary skin-safe technology, so you won't have cuts or snags or anything like that, which you absolutely do not want when trimming and keeping things nice and orderly down there. Best of all, our listeners can get 20% off plus free shipping with the code TSS at manscaped.com. One more time, that's promo code TSS to get 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. A link to Manscaped will obviously be in the show notes, and we thank them very much for sponsoring today's episode. With all that said, back to my USMNT chat with Mr. Joe Lowery. So I want to ask you a little bit more about your ideal 11, maybe 23, but probably 11 later on. One more kind of general question I had from these two games. It feels like a lot of times when we see Berhalter making substitutions, which does seem to be the way he adjusts, I don't see him doing a lot of in-game adjustments, whereas we saw Tata Martino and Oscar Tabarez making a lot of okay, now you after 20 minutes, somebody needs to sit on Jackson Ewell. And a few of the adjustments we saw from Tata, I felt really caused the United States problems. Berhalter, it seems to me, uses his substitutions sort of as that, except that those substitutions tend to be really like for like. And I'm wondering if you have an idea as to why, or if you agree, and if so, why that might be the case. Because it feels like if we see a left back coming out, it's a left back coming in. If we see a left midfielder coming out, it's a left midfielder coming in. We don't see a lot of a forward coming out and a central midfielder coming on, or a center back coming out and a center forward coming on. It feels like it's very similar. And the only reason I can see for that is because he just wants everyone to be buying into the system and sort of learning how to play a similar way, and then they can sort of adapt after that.
I think I had the same perspective, exactly what you just outlined. I think he wants to get players in the position that he believes that they'll play in. So, when we see Daniel Lovitz come on around the 70th minute in both of these friendlies, he's playing left back. Right. And, so they're rotating in almost like a platoon system. So maybe in future competitive games, we see that shift a little bit, but I'm trying to even think back to the Gold Cup, and I don't remember too many substitutions that completely changed or put more emphasis in one phase of the game over others. So I don't know exactly why that could be. I think there's value in adjusting the system and replicating real game situations, when you're trailing or when you're leading, adjusting the system a little bit to kind of put a stronghold or to try to catapult yourself back into the game. I think there's value to that and value to practicing those situations. But I think for now, in Berhalter's mind, at least, it's likely to get as many guys as he can in the spots that he likes them best in.
So then, moving forward, is it safe to say that some of the things that we think will be stressed by Berhalter, or we want to see stressed in terms of this team continuing to develop, would be taking advantage of the space once it's created, as you said, maybe improving distribution, especially out of the back, especially out of Zach Steffen, and then working on a few more of the combinations that we think will become sort of key patterns of play for the U.S. Would that be three? Are there any other things that you want to see the United States continue to develop specifically?
I think I definitely agree with those three items. It's easy for me to focus on the offensive side of the game of what the U.S. is doing, but there also is the defensive aspect as well, because the Berhalter wants to create this free-flowing possession team that goes quickly in the attack when the opportunity arises. But then when they lose the ball, I think we can see an improvement, or hopefully we will continue to see an improvement of the team's defensive structure and their pressing ability. I think it was decent, especially in the early going against Mexico. Their block was pretty effective. Weston McKennie and Zardes moved pretty well as that front two, denying angles into midfield and things like that. But as the team continues to grow and get more comfortable, hopefully get more comfortable in Berhalter's style, I think we're going to need to see an increase in their ability to counterpress and to win the ball after they lose it in the final third. Uruguay's goal came because Christian Roldan wouldn't foul right at the edge of the box to stop the counterattack. And I think I read that Berhalter talked about that moment specifically after the game. He wants to see his team be ruthless in defensive transition, to win the ball back, to make defending an offensive thing. It shouldn't be passive. So I think that's another thing that I'm really eager to see develop, to see the defensive side of the game develop and press and have them be just ruthless in how they win the ball back after they lose it.
All right, that's all very good information, and I ask it because I do want to talk about individual performances and some things we saw there, but I'm with you that I don't think this was a good camp. I'm with you on that letter grade, and I'm with you on some ways I want to see the team improve. But if we take Greg Berhalter at face value, who says, no, I was happier with that game against Mexico Friday night, happier with that game than I was the Gold Cup final against Mexico. If you're taking him at his word, then that means no one really played themselves out of form. If everybody did what was asked of them and the growing pains were there, then it stands to reason that a lot of these players are still up for consideration in the future. But then at the same time, with things looking so bleak, it's hard for me to accept that. And so I guess I wanted to get an idea of what you and I think the United States needs to improve on moving forward, so that we can then talk about some of these performers as to whether or not they did improve in this camp, or we saw some positive things from them, or if we feel like maybe going forward we're going to see less of them because they can't adapt. Does that work for you?
No, that's great. Yeah.
Sweet. All right. Then I guess I'll avoid being general, and I'll start with the center backs for a moment, because I thought of the ones we saw, I felt like Tim Ream was the best performing center back, especially against Uruguay. I mean, I think not playing against Mexico, that's probably a plus for him. What were your thoughts on his performance, both from a defensive standpoint, and then what I thought he really excelled at was kind of playing sort of probing balls. They didn't always come off, but I enjoyed his willingness to kind of split lines and try some passes that I felt like Aaron Long and Walker Zimmerman were maybe a little bit more hesitant to try to play.
I thought Tim Ream was pretty good in the Uruguay game. I think you highlighted what he did well on the ball, and I think that's his thing. That's his game, is making plays with the ball from that left center back spot. We've seen him a little bit wider at left back, or at that left-sided center back in possession in certain times, and I'm not sure that role suits him as well. I think he was just filling in because there was almost no one else that's left-footed and a defender who could do that. So Tim Ream, I thought, was good against Uruguay. I don't remember specific moments defensively where he either did a lot of positive or a lot of negative things. But from what I've seen of him in the past, he is sort of a limited defender. He's not Aaron Long in his mobility, right? He's not going to, be able to run around and cover a ton of ground. But if the U.S. can control possession in games, then he could be a real option at that left center back spot, especially with John Brooks being hurt so often.
What about his center back partner against Uruguay, Aaron Long? That's one where I think Felipe and Paul were both maybe, if not positive, then at least sort of we saw some good things from Aaron Long. He seems like he's in there. And for me, I think the thing that stands out is, the two things would be the Mexico result means that, to me, the defense wasn't very good. And then him getting roasted against Uruguay in that 1v1, it has left a negative impression in my mind. So I'm wondering if you are up or down on Aaron Long as a center back for the U.S.
I think just because of the Mexico performance, I'm kind of down on Long and his partner Walker Zimmerman, as both of them at the same time. Long, in the past, it sticks out to me in the Mexico game from the Gold Cup final, he did actually a really good job, at least in my opinion, of tracking with Raul Jimenez and making life really difficult for him. So we've seen what Aaron Long is capable of, but I don't think he had his best pair of performances in these friendlies. Maybe a little bit of grace we give him from the Mexico game, because I think he was planning to start alongside Brooks, and then his role changed a little bit, I imagine, pretty close to kickoff. But he's a professional, so those things really shouldn't have too much of an effect on him. But yeah, not Aaron Long's best camp, not his best international window, but I really doubt that his stock has changed too much in Berhalter's mind, just simply because of the lack of depth at that spot. And he has proven to be at least a consistent MLS performer and a moderately, decent option at center back for the U.S. on the international level.
So if we stick with the idea that Daryl always espouses of like you want your left center back to have a left foot, you want the right center back to have a right foot. In my mind, that means it's probably like John Brooks and Tim Ream would be our left-sided center backs, and then it's somewhere between like Aaron Long, Walker Zimmerman, Matt Miazga, maybe somebody else in there. Does that check out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with Daryl's premise there that you want to. Okay. As best you can, keep the left-footed players on the left, right-footed players on the right. So Ream and Brooks on one side, and then whatever the whole squad of center backs is on the other side. There's a number of them over there that probably don't really make a huge difference one over the other.
All right, and then in terms of their defensive partners further wide, I wanted to ask you about Reggie Cannon and Serginho Dest. I was like okay with a lot of what I saw from them. I felt like Serginho Dest very good in his 1v1 dribbling. Some of the deficiencies we've seen in his 1v1 defending were there on display. Some of his decision making as well, especially with his passes forward. I felt like we need to maybe shine up a little bit more, put some polish on those. And I say kind of the same stuff for Reggie Cannon. So where are you on those two, and what would you like to see them develop going forward for the next time they play for the United States if Serginho Dest ends up playing for the U.S.?
In my mind, Cannon and Dest probably are, assuming Dest stays with the U.S., which is not at all a fair assumption. I don't know what his personal preference is and what he'll decide to do. But if both of these guys keep being involved in the American player pool, I think they probably are the fullbacks, for the next few years at least. Reggie Cannon, I thought both players were good in this window. Reggie Cannon, maybe not as aggressive going forward or not as decisive with the ball as I would like to see from him, especially because of how active the fullbacks have to be in breaking a press. Just thinking about the Mexico game, I think he could continue to work on that part of his game a little bit. But on the whole, Cannon, from what I've seen of him with FC Dallas, is very good on the ball and willing to go forward and good at rotating into different spaces. I think he's versatile on that side. So I have high hopes for him and for his future. It seems that Berhalter really rates him ahead of Nick Lima at this point. So we have sort of an idea of what that spot is going to look like for the next little bit. Dest on the other side, it was really unfortunate that he gave up that nutmeg goal against Mexico because he had done a pretty good job against Tecatito in some moments before then, and I think it just kind of went downhill pretty quickly at that point. Defensively, he still does have things to work on. He's 18 years old, but I think he probably is still a better defender than maybe the narrative suggests. It's hard to say that given the fact that he did get burned pretty badly on that goal. And there are a couple moments where he wasn't perfect defensively as well. So definite room to improve on that side of the ball and offensively as well. We saw classic Serginho Dest things in this game, in this camp. We saw, him combine centrally, make these interior runs from left back and do all the fun things that we love to see from Serginho Dest. But I'd almost think that Berhalter would say that he wasn't assertive enough. He wasn't aggressive enough going forward. I think Dest could very well be the most talented offensive player in the pool. Really, I don't think that's saying too much. Christian Pulisic is pretty much the only other guy that I can see as having as much skill as Dest. So I want to see ways that Dest can be an offensive focal point and not just, when the ball rotates out to him at left back, we'll let him play around a little bit. I think we could see Berhalter try to develop different ways to make Dest a focal point in the attack. I don't think we quite saw that in this camp. We saw a few glimpses of what Dest can do combining on the left with Pulisic in that early stages of the Mexico game, but I'm going to be keeping my eye on that for the future to see how he is involved in the attack.
So Daryl had argued that he wanted to see Dest played further forward because he felt like, one, he could do some damage there, but number two, there was less pressure on him to come in and do a defensive job. And I think the nutmeg against Mexico was sort of exhibit A in why he wanted that. Is that something you would like to see? Would you like to see Dest given a run out as a more kind of dedicated winger?
I would absolutely be interested in that. The only issue is then are we back to Tim Ream at left back, and then that's kind of starts the cycle over again. So just looking at Dest in a vacuum, I would absolutely be interested in seeing him get more of an increased role in the attack, but there are other variables, and I don't know exactly how to solve them.
All right, that's fair. A couple of other specific players I wanted to bring up. I have said a couple times that I think we know enough about Christian Roldan at this point. I think he's okay. I think he's great for Seattle, but I don't think he's going to be a next-level performer for the United States, and I don't know if he has that much that he can develop to become that. That opinion, that I've said multiple times, is sometimes translated as as me bashing him. I don't feel like I am, but I guess I got between 2 and like 40 messages telling me that I bash Christian Roldan or that I'm being unfair, that I'm only focusing on his kind of deficits. So Again, I feel like I've asked you this before. I'm going to ask it again. Am I missing something about Christian Roldan when it comes to the U.S. national team? And if I'm not, I'm wondering if you have ideas about what I should be watching, so maybe I'm looking for the positives, because the moments that stand out to me, like you mentioned before, like him failing to make that foul to stop the counterattack, some of his sort of passes being a little bit errant, and there's like a 30-second sequence where I feel like he passes it to the wrong person 3 times. And those moments stand out to me. So I had a few people say like, oh, we are only focusing on the negative moments, and you didn't talk at all about his positives.
So go ahead and plug your ears, Seattle Sounders fans. Okay, you should have them plugged by now. Yeah. I don't see anything. I don't think you're missing anything, Taylor. He's a fine player. I think he's a very, very good MLS player. He's great for Seattle. I'm just echoing what you're saying, basically. I don't think he brings anything that really the other options in central midfield don't. So to the national team, I think he's I think Paul Tenorio literally said this, when you guys were talking about it. I think he's a good 5th or 6th central midfield option, but he probably shouldn't be more than that. And I think that's okay. Like, you can still be a good player for your club, a very good player with decent upside, and not be a huge national team contributor. So Roldan's game in my mind is he's that classic 2-way player. He can make plays both ways with Seattle. He can fill in a lot of different roles, play kind of anywhere across the different vertical channels of the field. But then when we've seen with the national team, and you highlighted that exact play, when he doesn't make that foul there, mm-hmm. That's kind of what he's there for, is to muck up the game defensively and to make a few impact offensive plays a game. But when he's not taking advantage of those opportunities, it's hard to keep seeing reasons to get him real minutes with the national team.
One of the letters I got came from Eric Main. Eric, I hope you don't mind me putting your business in the street. But basically, he was disagreeing with me in my appraisal of Roldan for a variety of reasons. One of them was that I praised Sebastian Lletget and then was negative towards Roldan. Eric put in a bunch of statistics showing me how statistically Roldan had a good performance, but the one that I think he thought kind of made his argument, Eric, I apologize again because you can't really defend yourself, but I'm going to throw it out anyway, was like Roldan's passing map. He had, I think, 10 misplaced passes as opposed to Lletget's 3, but Eric's argument was that like a lot of them were line-splitting forward direct passes that didn't come off. And I think that right there, though, is where I am on Christian Roldan, to like further explain why I'm not as excited about him or not as up as maybe Seattle fans are, is just that like you need that midfielder in my mind to be able to come in and to be able to kind of pull off anything you're asking them to do. So like using Weston McKennie as an example, like I have faith in him to be able to play forward passes that do split lines, but then also put in the defensive shift, but then also make simple short passes. And if you have a person who's sort of not completing the passes forward, not kind of facilitating the attack, to me then they're doing a couple specific roles okay, but they're not like making that next step in the right direction because they're not helping you elevate your game. And I think that's where I am with Christian Roldan, is I know what he can do, but I don't feel like he's going to help the US's attack elevate to that next level. So I'm not going to be angry if I see him on a roster again. I'm not angry about many people that I see on rosters, but I'm not going to be like elated either. I'm assuming he'll be on there a few more times, but he's not the one I think I want when we're coming up with our 23-man squad, hopefully for the World Cup.
I'm with you. I think we've seen Roldan's ceiling, and that's fine. That's nothing, that he should feel like he has to adjust at this point. He kind of is who he is as a player. And so Seattle fans and Christian Roldan supporters are fine to see the positives in him. We all have different biases that, we don't necessarily realize, or maybe we do realize and we're proud of it. But Roldan, I think, is a fine player who can do the job as long as that job is, kind of being a slightly above average midfielder.
Hey folks, one more quick interruption to let you know that today's episode is brought to you in part by our old pals over at Roughneck Scarves. That's RUFFNECK scarves.com. They are the official scarf provider for U.S. Soccer, for Major League Soccer, for the NCAA, and for the USL. You can obviously get scarves for the U.S. men's national team. You can also get them for the U.S. women's national team. I really like some of the women's national team offerings, including the 4 stars one. That one's pretty solid. Then they've got the Flora Eagle. You can find those under like the featured scarves right now. Both of those look great. I'm going to assume feel great too, because we know Roughneck has excellent quality. But as I was scrolling their options, I noticed there are hockey scarves. If you're a hockey fan, you could go that route. And then I noticed there's a scarf that says Ollie on it, and I did not know what that was because I don't live in LA and I am not an LAFC fan. So I did some researching, and I love that LA has a scarf for one of their Falcons. LAFC have 3 Falcons that I guess they fly before every game. Ollie gets his own one. I don't know why Fig and Mel are left out. Maybe Ollie is just the most marketable, brandable one. I'm not sure. Maybe he's the most popular. He's probably the most charming. But you could get an Ollie scarf, but obviously if you're a fan of any MLS team, they have got you covered with scarves for every single franchise. So you can get one of the 14,000 Atlanta scarves and many other offerings as well, including Austin scarves. If you're an Austin FC fan, they've got you covered there too. Best of all, our listeners can get a whopping 20% off any scarf in the shop with the promo code Total Soccer Show. I should know that does not include the custom scarf option, which you can obviously use to create a scarf for whatever you might need. Maybe the other 2 Falcons get a little bit bitter. Maybe Fig makes his own scarf. Maybe Mel does the same. Ollie already has hers, so she doesn't need one. But once again, that's roughneckscarves.com, and you can use the promo code Total Soccer Show, all one word, all uppercase, to get 20% off any scarf in the shop. We thank Roughneck very much for their continued sponsorship of the Total Soccer Show. It's obviously very much appreciated. Now back to my conversation with Joe. Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. So on the same page there, where are you on Josh Sargent's performance? That's one where I really liked what I saw from him in terms of his movement against Uruguay, his attempts to be direct at certain times, but then dropping into others, and then being deliberate in possession at times, but then still trying to take people on fairly directly. Felipe and Paul, I think, were slightly cooler on him. So I guess I'll ask you the same thing I asked Reggie Cannon and Sergiño Dest. Like, what are a couple things you want to see Josh Sargent develop either this season or over the next couple months, so that by the time we see him again, we can kind of tell, like, oh, his game has progressed and now he's doing these couple things that maybe he wasn't able to do before, maybe Giassi Zardes isn't able to do, and that's why he needs to be our second, if not first choice striker.
Josh Sargent already does, in my mind, so many things that Giassi Zardes can't do, that I don't really see the argument for not having him compete with Josie Altidore for that first-string striker role. But if we're looking at things that I think Sargent could continue to improve on to maybe push himself past Altidore, I think we're looking at, just consistently getting in opportunities inside the box and getting shots on goal in dangerous areas. That's what I want to see from Sargent. And because of the way Berhalter structured his offensive shape against Uruguay, we didn't see him spend a ton of time, like right between the center backs when the U.S. had the ball in the final third, just kind of lurking in the box to try to get those poachers goals. We didn't see a ton of that because Berhalter had him dropping deeper, trying to help his team, progress ball through midfield and things like that. So I want to see Sargent score goals. Basically, that's the long and short of it. Is I think we need an American striker who can put points on the board. Like, we need to see him become lethal in the box, and I think he has so many other parts of playing striker already, like, in his arsenal. I think he is very, very good at dropping deeper, and that's likely why Berhalter had to do that against Uruguay. He's good at reading the defensive line. So he, like you mentioned, he had some very nice direct runs as well. Tim Ream played a lovely ball over the top, and Sargent's movement completely faked out the opposing defensive line because he had been dropping short so many times. He got in behind. So there's a mental aspect of it as well that I think Sargent is good at, or at least it appears that he has that part of his game. But I would really like to see him get consistent minutes for Werder Bremen and become more of that classic old-fashioned striker to couple with his already developing skills on the ball.
So, like, you're right that it sounds obvious to say, like, I want the striker to be a striker. I want them to score goals. But it is a really valuable thing, obviously, because that's how you win games, but also because, for me, I think about it, and, like, I don't know who the best finisher is on the team right now, but I do know that, Giassi Zardes, Josie Altidore, even Josh Sargent, if they're one-on-one with a goalkeeper, I'm hoping they score that goal, but I don't necessarily have faith that they're definitely going to. And, like, it's unfair maybe, but I contrast that with, like, Robert Lewandowski, you would always assume is going to score in a 1v1 scenario. He's going to he's going to pick the spot, pass it in perfectly, be smart, be calm on the ball. Those three forwards for the U.S., I don't have that same level of faith right now. And I guess that makes me wonder then, do you have a person who you think of as being like who you think is probably the best finisher on the team, or if not in this squad, then maybe like in the national team pool, who you think is definitely just like that clinical striker that the U.S. could use?
Christian Pulisic is really the only guy who I think if he's in a 1v1 with the goalkeeper, who I would, kind of take in a bet. Zardes, Altidore, I think maybe more so than Gyasi Zardes. Sargent, again, I don't quite know yet. I want to see more of him. And that skill hopefully will develop as he continues to get minutes. But basically outside of Pulisic, I'm not sure I'd take anybody consistently in a 50-50.
Well, that's kind of sad, but I feel like probably representative of where we are. Any other players that stood out to you for either positive or negative reasons? We talked a little bit about Jackson Ewan, sort of the diagonal ball playing. I felt like he did well with that, but it was against Uruguay, so like the lack of pressure there was literally no pressure on him in the first 20 minutes. So I can't tell will he be able to do that under pressure? I guess that's the thing we'll see. But who else impressed you, or who else failed to impress you?
One guy, and I don't think this is going to be a particularly popular, statement, but I thought Brad Guzan did the job, decently well against Uruguay. There's complaining whenever he's in the team now because he is older, but I'm not convinced that he isn't the best, goalkeeper that we currently have, that the United States has access to. So Guzan is one guy that I'm keeping my eye on. And then I thought Jordan Morris was good against Uruguay. I think he was comfortable, and I know you've talked about this already, Taylor. I think he was comfortable with his left foot, which is something that maybe we haven't seen as much in the past. So that was an encouraging development for me. Outside of those guys, frankly, I'm not sure that I have anyone in particular. I thought Weston McKennie, was poor against Mexico, and I'm a little concerned about what I'm seeing from him with the national team over the last couple of games. But the Mexico game was just all in all a really awful performance from the entire team. So I also don't want to read too much into a one player's negative performance when there were so many others as well.
I want to jump in there really fast to say, I agree entirely with your point about Weston McKennie, and I want to say that to then say that when I was using him as my example when we were talking about Roldan versus Legette's passing, I used him, and then immediately in my head as I was talking was he might not be the best example in terms of consistent passing performances and overall consistent play for the national team. So I think we're in the same boat about McKennie. So maybe that's hopefully that's instability at club level, and as Schalke continue to kind of gel and find the right way to play and find the way they want to play under David Wagner, maybe his performances with the national team progress. But I absolutely enjoyed what I saw from Jordan Morris, because I think with what we were talking about earlier and some of the hesitation to take the space and hesitation to play balls in or to try stuff, and feeling like there were players thinking, and it's strange to say, but I think sometimes in soccer the worst thing you can do is think versus just sort of act within instinct. And it did seem like Jordan Morris had moments where he was doing what was asked of him and executing the game plan. But then every now and then there were those moments where he was just all right, head down, I'm going past you, and then I'm going to cross it. And that cross was frequently with the left foot was the other reason why he stood out to me, because I felt like he kind of played the system and did what Berhalter wanted. But then in those moments had that sort of stereotypical or customary, I guess, depending on your perspective, fight that we want to see from national team players. And obviously his goal against Uruguay is a good example of that. He doesn't give up, nor is it Nick Lima who keeps that one alive?
Yes, that's correct.
Those two fighting for it, but Jordan Morris, chesting it into the goal. I like that he was there. That felt representative of his international break.
I'm totally with you. I think it was encouraging to see Jordan Morris get on the score sheet there, especially because I do think he had a good performance in that game. So I don't know, maybe we'll continue to see Morris get a few minutes, in Nations League games over the next couple of months, and see how he continues to develop both with Seattle and the national team.
So I don't think of you as a reactionary person, or at least not on Twitter. You're not. I don't see a lot of hyperbolic rhetoric out there. But with that said, at this point in Berhalter's tenure, with Nations League games coming up, World Cup qualification isn't that far away. Are there any players that you sort of don't want to see on future rosters? Not ones that you're going to complain about and moan about and write in all caps about, but just are there names in there that you think I've seen enough? I know what he's trying to do. I know the system now. You're not quite pulling it off.
Guys that I just don't think really bring a whole lot to the table at this point. Some of the guys on the bench, I think really, Daniel Lovitz, I don't quite know what he brings to the table. Mm-hmm. Then you also have, it's hard to say, but Gyasi Zardes and Will Trapp both, I don't think bring a whole lot that isn't able to be replicated by other guys that maybe have a little bit more upside. But all these players, the Corey Baird is another one.
Yep.
He's a fine player. but I don't think they bring a whole lot to the table. But again, from Berhalter's perspective, who else is he going to call up? If he's not calling up, U20 players who are getting minutes for reserve teams in the Netherlands, which is an entirely different discussion as to whether those guys, should be called in, or how much playing for your club matters in terms of national team, all that stuff. That's another topic. But I guess I don't know. The pool is just so shallow right now that we can complain about these guys getting called in, but I just don't know who they would be replaced by, if that makes sense. So I don't love watching Gyasi Zardes play soccer, but I mean, if Josie Altidore is out, like, who else are we going to see other than Josh Sargent? So that's the difficult spot that I recognize Berhalter is in. And so while there are guys that I just really don't quite see it at the national team level, I understand his predicament.
So let me ask you this then. If we had a World Cup qualifier that, like, against decent opposition that we needed to win, what would be your starting 11, and like maybe one that combines sort of what we know about Berhalter, what he wants to do from a like stylistic, tactical standpoint versus what you think, or like combining that with what you think would work? What would that 11 look like?
So a goalkeeper is tough because I am sort of debating between Stefan and Guzan because
you can leave
I don't
it there.
think
You can leave it with two options. That's fine. It doesn't have to be
so
one.
Okay, so those guys are in there for sure, and then I think a back line of Reggie Cannon at right back, Aaron Long and Brooks as the two center back partners. Again, if John Brooks is healthy, I think you have a nice balance of ideally defensive mobility from Aaron Long and then offensive capabilities. Brooks's offensive abilities are well noted and recorded at this point. Serginho Dest at left back. I don't buy the whole, let's play a more experienced guy at that spot, because it's Daniel Lovitz or Tim Ream at this point. I think Dest brings more than either one of those guys can at left back. So that's my back line: Cannon, Long, Brooks, and Dest. And then if we're seeing sort of this three-man midfield, kind of like we saw in both of these friendlies, and we're not expecting Berhalter to mess with the midfield shape and structure a little bit, then I still think Michael Bradley is the number 6, and you let Adams and McKennie, you hope that they have enough offensive creativity to make that worthwhile. Maybe you bring Dest forward, and that's where some of the creative boost comes from. But Adams and McKennie in place of, I guess, McKennie and Morales, if we're looking at the Mexico game, we plug those two guys in midfield in front of Michael Bradley. And then the front line, if everyone's healthy, I think seeing Tim Weah, Josie Altidore, and Christian Pulisic is a nice blend of ability to go direct, ability, for Josie Altidore to drop into midfield and help move play forward like we saw Sargent do against Uruguay, and then Pulisic's creativity combining with Dest on that left side and moving centrally when necessary. I think that 11 and that front three specifically with Weah, Altidore, and Pulisic is one that I'm very interested to see, and I hope that we get all those guys healthy over the next couple of months, and we do see that at some point, at least before World Cup qualifying next year.
I kind of forgot about the idea of Tyler Adams as like the number 10, or if you're going to go with like dual number 8s, playing him there. I forgot that was an option because I feel like that has become Pulisic's position. But you're absolutely right that if you move Pulisic wide, where he can absolutely thrive, you have Timothy Weah on the right. And then that does give you a pretty strong midfield. I think I'm okay with that. The one wrinkle, does it matter if DeAndre Yedlin comes back and gets fit and looks decent? Do you feel like at this point it's going to be Reggie Cannon and then maybe it's like Yedlin and Nick Lima? Or what's the kind of pecking order there at right back for you?
I'm going to be honest, I completely forgot DeAndre Yedlin existed. Sorry, DeAndre, if you're listening to this.
I mean, he's been hurt for a little while. I think that's justified.
Right. So in my mind, I don't think anything changes. Yedlin, I've never been an avid supporter of his. He's fine. He's a fine player. Oh, that's really hard. Taylor. I don't know. I'd probably still go with Cannon if it was up to me.
Okay. All right. And then and then center back depth, is it Zimmerman, Miazga? Would you put Tim Ream in there maybe as like the left back substitute if we're going to kind of flush out this roster from there?
Yeah, so I definitely bring Tim Ream because while I don't think he did a great job at left back in the past, he can do a job there. Mm-hmm. The quality of the job is up for debate, but he also can fill in at left center back, which is great. So when Brooks is injured with some sort of knock, then Ream can step in there. So those Ream and Miazga at center back, I think, is fair if we're bringing 4 center backs, which I think is normal, right? Or is it 5?
It can be whatever you want it to be. It's your roster.
Oh, the freedom. Yeah, so I think those guys, and then if I come back through and I didn't build this roster correctly, then maybe you throw in a Walker Zimmerman or a Miles Robinson, depending on what you're looking for. If it's more defensive oriented, or you want hopefully a plus side passer. Although again, Zimmerman didn't show that he's capable of doing that in the Mexico game.
And then you said earlier that like you're kind of okay with maybe seeing less of Will Trapp at this point. That's the nice way to put it. If you have Michael Bradley playing at number 6, at this point is Jackson Ewell your sort of deputy there, or are there other names that you think could fit in?
I'd love to see Jackson Ewell keep getting into this team. I think he brings some nice upside on both sides of the ball. Playing for Mateus Almeida in San Jose, you have to have some sort of defensive ability and desire to hunt down and win the ball. So Ewell is a good one. Also, I think Tyler Adams could fill that spot. The only reason I didn't put him there is because, we've talked about before, until Berhalter believes that he can hit those long diagonal balls, and we're not going to see him as the 6. And it's become old hat at this point. So Adams, in my mind, absolutely could slide back there as well. And if for some reason neither one of those guys is there, then put Will Trapp in. He's fine. He's decent with the ball under pressure. He had a couple nice moments in that Mexico game. I think more so than maybe some of the other midfielders in there. But if I'm getting to pick, it's probably Jackson Ewell and then Tyler Adams as well.
Okay. And then Josie Altidore up top, Josh Sargent deputizing?
Yeah, that would be my preference. I think you let those two guys fight it out in camp, and if Sargent is, way better, then you let him start. Otherwise, Altidore is the go-to.
All right. And then, in terms of wide options, this is where the United States feels especially thin, which I think is the consistent idea of why you should play Christian Pulisic out wide. It's why I kind of think they should too. But if you're looking for depth there, is it Paul Arriola and Jordan Morris, do you think, are your options coming in?
I think past Weah and Pulisic in the depth chart, those two guys are the next on each side. They can kind of both play on either side. Mm-hmm. I think I think of Morris as being stronger on that right wing because of his right foot, but we saw him be effective on the left against Uruguay. And Arriola, he can do pretty much anything. You can stick him at fullback if you need to. So I think just for his positional versatility and defensive abilities, Paul Arriola's in there as a depth guy on this roster.
I think we're not far off from what probably Berhalter's strongest 23 would be. We still can't know for sure if Tyler Adams is going to be used as the right back turned central midfielder on occasion, if that's a strategy he's going to stick with, or if at this point he will just try to play him in the midfield. But that's a thing I guess we'll have to wait until October to find out. What we don't have to wait to find out, because we already know this, is that Phoenix is very good at soccer, and that's how I wanted to close out the show. Mr. Lowery, I know you are a Phoenix Rising fan. Can we talk for a little bit about your USL squad?
Oh, let's do, please. It's been an incredible ride this season, getting to be up close, cover this team, and cover this win streak that they're currently on. I've never seen anything like it.
So I have not been paying that much attention to the Western Conference of the USL Championship this season. You obviously have, as you've said. So for people who have missed this, what is the streak, and how have Phoenix been able to pull this off?
So just to give some background information, Phoenix Rising has won 19 straight games, which broke the previously held record for consecutive wins in any American professional soccer division in the history of all recorded soccer results in the United States. So they've made history. Yeah, just casual. They're doing pretty okay. So right now, as of the time of recording, they're 18 points clear on the top of the Western Conference, which is just insane. It's absurd. They built this win streak with not just exceedingly dominant performances. They have done that. Don't get me wrong. They've beat teams by 4 goals, 5 goals, 6 goals throughout this win streak. But they've also had to win, had to just really get down and dirty and still play their style, which is very, free-flowing, pleasing, attacking soccer. But they've had to win games in some not so pretty ways. They had Solomon Asante, who just won the league's Player of the Month. He's a former Ghanaian international who's good enough to be playing in so many different places around the world. He's absolutely a phenomenal winger. Just hit a game-winning free kick in the dying moments of a game last weekend against San Antonio. And then last night they just beat Las Vegas Lights at their baseball field. And Adam John, former MLS striker.
Was that a little bit of shade there, Joe?
A little bit. I mean, it's not – watching the game to analyze it for tactics is terrible because the camera angles is just awful. So that's more where my shade comes in.
I got you.
Adam John, capitalized on a Las Vegas mistake and just buried the ball in the side of the net. Just had no business scoring it really, but was in the right place at the right time because he's a smart guy and a very, very good striker. So it just all these components are coming together, and the team doesn't want to stop. At this point, the streak is old news kind of here in Phoenix. Some mainstream media outlets are somehow just now getting on board and realizing that this is something that's happening. But for those of us that have kind of been around from the beginning of the season, like players and coaches kind of don't even really want to talk about it anymore because, you get the same questions over and over again. Oh, how did it feel to win this week and add to the streak? You can multiply that by 18 now after the first week of games. So it's insane. It's crazy. At some point, it's going to come to an end, but I wouldn't dare guess when that's going to be.
So a couple of things there. The 18-point lead, worth noting, PSG, a team that we always mock for just running away with league, won the league last season by 16 points. So that, USL Championship, you would assume slightly more competitive. Maybe Phoenix don't have quite the financial resources either. So that, to me, stands out as to getting that amount of a lead, but also the way they've done it is especially impressive. You talked a little bit about how they've played, but then how they've adapted, how they've been practical on occasion. But similar question to what I asked you about Berhalter in the U.S. right now. If someone's asking you, why is this team exciting aside from the streak? How do they play? What should I pay attention to? How would you answer that?
So they have sort of a non-official official relationship with LAFC. Right. So for those out there that have watched LAFC play, there are some definite similarities. They stick to a 4-3-3, and they really move the ball quickly in possession. They press to win it back. So there's some high pressing that goes on off goal kicks and some counter pressing when they lose the ball in the attacking half. They love line breaking passes from their center backs. That's something that Rick Schantz talks about all the time, that manager Rick Schantz really loves to see. So AJ Cochran, who's their left center back more often than not, and then they've brought in Corey Whelan, who is playing in England for Liverpool's youth teams. They're both very good on the ball, and the other center backs on the roster are as well. So it's a very offensive-oriented team that when they defend as well, they turn that into attacking. So they love to call it offensive defending. When they don't have the ball, it's still an active situation. There's always risk. They talk about risk all the time, the coaching staff, in how they play, but they love that, and that's the culture that they've built is taking risks in possession and out of possession, but with the belief that those things are going to pay off. And as kind of their success this season indicates, it really has paid off.
So we started the show with a little bit of a cliche question. I'm going to end it with a cliche question. As you said, they've made history, but if they don't win USL Championship, would you rather they have this streak and not win, or would you rather they have been a pretty good team that ends up winning the title but doesn't have that streak?
Oh, that's a great question. This streak is something that I won't forget, and that I know so many other people here in Arizona won't forget either. But if you asked anybody in the organization and any of the players and coaches, they would say if they don't end the season with the USL Championship trophy, it's really not worthwhile. So I think I tend to agree with that. Winning the league is probably still more important. As great and as exciting as a long winning streak is, if you don't end the season with the trophy that actually matters, then really at a certain point people aren't going to remember anymore.
And actually, final question: how much of this team is sort of organically constructed versus hey, Major League Soccer, see how good we are? This is how good we could be for you. Is this a team that if they don't become another MLS franchise, will they continue to operate and be strong or as strong as they've been? Or do you think this is sort of a sustained push to maybe attract the attention of Major League Soccer to show MLS that they can be a competitive team?
Getting attention from MLS and from people who watch MLS and want to see, the best teams get in that league is an advantage, but there's no doubt in my mind that even if the streak wasn't happening, the way the club has built and has grown organically since the last few years, that they will continue to operate at a high level. It won't always be this high, but it is sustainable, regardless of whether or not MLS ever comes calling or whether the team makes a formal expansion bid to get into MLS. This team is going to be a fixture here in Phoenix for a long time.
There we go. And Joe is going to be a fixture on the Total Soccer Show for a very long time because he brings the analysis of both Phoenix and the U.S. men's national team, also Major League Soccer. I had planned to talk a little bit about that, but we've gone plenty long on all things American soccer for right now for me. So, Joe, I just wanted to thank you again for taking all the time to help me make sense of this international window, and I look forward to chatting again soon.
Absolutely. It's always a blast, my friend.